Genesis chapter 27 and verse 1. It says, "Now it came about when Isaac was old and his eyes were too dim to see, that he called his older son Esau and said to him, 'My son.' And he said to him, 'Here I am.' Verse 2, Isaac said, 'Behold, now I am old, and I do not know the day of my death. Now then, please take your gear, your quiver, and your bow, and go out to the field and hunt game for me, and prepare a savory dish for me, such as I love, and bring it to me that I may eat, so that my soul may bless you before I die.'" Now, remember a little bit of background before we get deeper into chapter 27. If you look back to chapter 25 and verse 27, you're going to see why that Esau is favored here by Isaac. Talking about after the boys were born, the twins, verse 27, "When the boys grew up, Esau became a skillful hunter, a man of the field, but Jacob was a peaceful man, living in tents. Now Isaac loved Esau because he had a taste for game, but Rebekah loved Jacob." And so there you have in chapter 25 kind of a background to things, that there was a favoritism that was there between the father Isaac and Esau. And Isaac believed that it would be Esau who would receive the blessing, the inheritance. He was physically the firstborn, but as you remember the prophecy back in chapter 25, verse 22 and 23, when Rebekah was still pregnant with the twins, it says, "But the children struggled together within her, and she said, 'If it is so, why then am I thus this way?' So she went to inquire of the Lord." Now here's what the Lord said about it. The Lord said in verse 23 to her, "Two nations are in your womb." So these two children would be the ancestor of two nations. "And two peoples will be separated from your body. And the one people shall be stronger than the other, and the older shall serve the younger." The older shall serve the younger. Now in the normal activity of things, the firstborn would be served by the younger. The firstborn would be the one who would receive the blessing and would receive the inheritance and would be the head of the family after the father died. But in this situation, according to God's will, the older, which would be Esau, he was technically born first, would serve the younger, would serve Jacob. But in Isaac's thinking of things, he wanted to pass the blessing on and the inheritance on to the firstborn. Now also remember what happened in chapter 25 concerning Jacob and Esau and the despising of the birthright. Esau despised his birthright because he thought he was going to die, and he sold it to Jacob. Now, according to prophecy, Jacob was going to be the one through whom the blessings of Abraham would pass. That was going to happen anyway. So what we're going to see here in chapter 27 is unnecessary, but yet you see how deceptive that Jacob is and Jacob's mother is. And so here you have Isaac, chapter 27, verses 1 through 4, telling Esau to go and hunt. Take your hunting equipment, go into the field and hunt game for me, and prepare a savory dish, verse 4, that I love. And so it's going to prepare a feast or a savory dish and come that I might bless you. And I want you to notice verse 2. He says, "Behold, now I am old, and I do not know the day of my death." And you know, every person here can say that. It doesn't matter how old you are, and it doesn't matter how young you are. We don't know the day of our death. I mean, we all we all plan when we would like to grow old and die, surrounded by our family and such, and perhaps, go to sleep and die in our sleep. But we don't have the luxury of choosing that. And so we, like Isaac, can say, we don't know the day of our death. You can go about your daily normal activities one week and then the next week be planning a funeral. I mean, this is how it is. Hebrews 9:27 talks about it's appointed that a man wants to die. After that, the judgment. Death is an appointment we're all going to keep. As long as the world stands, death is an appointment that we're all going to keep. And so, when you're talking about someone who is way up in age or someone who's terminally ill, sometimes they say it's just a matter of time. But that's really true of all of us. It's just a matter of time. And when I involve myself in preaching funerals and doing eulogies, I think, one of these days I'm going to be in that casket. I'm going to be there. And that's just the reality of it. It's sobering. And that's the one thing that's good about funerals. It's sobering. It helps us to realize our mortality and helps us to realize that we're not going to live here on earth forever and that we better prepare ourselves and always be ready. And if you're always in a right relationship with God, you're always ready to die, no matter when it is. Whether it be through an accident, you're a young person and you're killed in an accident, or whether it's some disease and you die within 5 to 10 years, or whether you grow to be 105. If you're always in a right relationship with God, you're always ready to die. So many, many great lessons can be taken from that statement. It's just one of those things where some people, sometimes young people think that they're going to live forever. They almost have this immortal attitude about them, that they're going to defy death and then they're going to grow old and then their life is cut short because of foolish mistakes they make or foolish mistakes others make, and then their life is cut down. And they plan on later on in life getting serious about God. And we're not guaranteed a later on in life. We know not the day of our death. So Isaac is getting Esau to go out and hunt in the field and to prepare a savory dish. He's going to pass the blessing on to Esau. That's his plan. Verse 5, Rebekah was listening while Isaac spoke to his son Esau. So when Esau went to the field to hunt for game to bring home, Rebekah said to her son Jacob, verse 6, Behold, I heard your father speak to your brother Esau, saying, Bring me some game and prepare a savory dish for me, that I may eat and bless you in the presence of the Lord before my death. So Rebekah overheard the conversation, and she starts thinking of a scheme to where Jacob can receive this blessing. And like I said before, it's unnecessary because according to prophecy, it was going to pass to Jacob anyway. And so, but the deceitfulness here is seen in Rebekah and in the scheme that she is conjuring up. And she says, and remember, Rebekah favored Jacob. And so there's that favoritism there. She didn't want the blessing to go to Esau. But Isaac was wanting it to go to Esau. Rebekah was wanting to go to Jacob. And as a result of that, she conjures up this scheme. Verse 9, Now go to the flock and bring me 2 choice young goats from there, that I may prepare them as a savory dish for your father as he loves. Then you shall bring it to your father, that he may eat, so that he may bless you before his death. So you go and you kill 2 young goats or something from the flock there, choice goats, and I'm going to prepare this dish, and that you might receive the blessing. Verse 11, Jacob answered and said to Rebekah, Behold, Esau my brother is a hairy man, and I am smooth. Perhaps my father will feel me, then I will be as a deceiver in his sight, and I will bring upon myself a curse and not a blessing. Well, he's going to be a deceiver anyway. He's being deceptive anyway, and he didn't want his father, Isaac, to detect the deception. And so it doesn't matter whether, really Isaac detected it or not. He was still being dishonest. It doesn't matter whether you're caught or not in deception, you're still being dishonest. A lot of people think it's okay to do something dishonestly as long as you don't get caught. Some members of the church think that way. So it's okay to do something wrong as long as you don't get caught, but the thing is, with God, you're always caught. In fact, you're caught before you do it. So there's no escaping the guilt. No one else may know about it, but God certainly does, and He is the judge. And the one who can bring a blessing upon us or a curse in the eternal sense. So here, Jacob didn't want to get caught by his father and be a deceiver in his sight. He was more concerned about what his father thought than what God the Father thought in this situation. So he didn't want a curse to be brought upon himself. Verse 13, but his mother said to him, Your curse be on me, my son. Only obey my voice and go get them for me. So he went and got them and brought them to his mother. And his mother made a savory food, such as his father loved. Verse 15, Then Rebekah took the best garment of Esau, her elder son, which were with her in the house, and put them on Jacob, her younger son. Verse 16, And she put the skins of the young goats on his hands and on the smooth part of his neck. So they're making it to where the skins of the young goats would be placed there on the smooth of his neck and on his arms, because Esau was a hairy man. So just in case Isaac does a little bit further investigation, because at this time he's going blind. He's going to check it out a little bit further, and he touches, well, there you have the hair on the arms and on the neck to supposedly prove that this is Esau. Verse 17, She also gave the savory food and the bread which she made to her son Jacob. Verse 18, Then he came to his father and said, My father, and he said, Here am I. Who are you, my son? Remember, his eyesight, verse 1, is dim. He can't see very well. He's advanced in years, over 100 by this time. Verse 19, Jacob said to his father, I am Esau, your firstborn. I have done as you told me. Get up, please, and eat of my game, that you may bless me. So here goes the charade, the deception. Verse 20, Isaac said to his son, How is it that you have it so quickly, my son? And he said, Because the Lord your God caused it to happen to me. Now he's going to bring God into his deception. And notice the language he says here. The Lord your God. That's telling. Was he not a descendant of Abraham? Isn't it supposed to be their God? The God of the Hebrew people? But you can see here that Jacob is knowing he's doing something wrong. So he's distancing himself by saying, the Lord your God caused it to happen to me. So Isaac at verse 20 is already suspicious. You did this too quickly. How did you do this so quickly? And so Jacob says, well, the Lord caused it to happen to me. And so he brings God into the lie. Verse 21, Then Isaac said to Jacob, Please come close, that I may feel you, my son, whether you are really my son Esau or not. So, here goes the further investigation on his part to see whether that's really him or not. Verse 22. So Jacob came close to Isaac his father, and he felt him and said, the voice is the voice of Jacob, but the hands are the hands of Esau. So again, there's further suspicion. I can feel the hair, and I know that Esau is a hairy man, but the voice is the voice of Jacob. Verse 23. He did not recognize him because his hands were hairy like his brother Esau's hands, so he blessed him. So Isaac went ahead and blessed him. He was deceived. He was deceived in this situation. And it's interesting that he wanted the blessing. He was going to get it anyway, but then he went through this deception. He listened to ungodly counsel. He listened to his mother in doing this ungodly counsel. You know, as a general rule, children should listen to their parents until the parents start telling them to do things contrary to the will of God. When they start telling you or giving you advice contrary to the will of God, then that's when the children have to start listening to God. And so Jacob here involves himself in the deception by his own free will. He didn't have to go along with it, but he did. And he covered himself up in the skin to present himself as though he were something he were not. You know, I can't help but be reminded about what Jesus said in Matthew chapter 7 about false prophets come to you in sheep's clothing, but inwardly they are ravenous wolves. The deception. They appear to be something on the outside that they're really not on the inside. And that's exactly what's happening here. Jacob is pretending to be something that he is not. Also, he is saying what he's doing is according to really God's will, verse 20, because the Lord your God caused it to happen to me. This is God's will, and so he brings further condemnation upon himself by doing that. It's just a terrible situation. So, any questions or comments before we go further? So, verse 23, he did not recognize him because his hands were hairy like his brother Esau's hands. So he blessed him, verse 24. And he said, are you really my son Esau? And he said, I am. Again, there's further suspicion. Your voice is different. You feel like him, but your voice is different. Verse 25. So he said, bring it to me, and I will eat of my son's game, that I may bless you. And he brought it to him, and he ate. He also brought him wine, and he drank. Verse 26. Then his father Isaac said to him, please come close and kiss me, my son. So he came close and kissed him, and when he smelled the smell of the garments, he blessed him and said, see, the smell of my son is the smell of the field which the Lord has blessed. Remember, there was a garment that belonged to Esau that was placed upon Jacob, so that when Isaac got close, he would smell that outdoorsy smell, so to speak, and think, well, this really is him. So the deception was by touch and by smell, and the only thing he couldn't fake was the voice. But he pretty much pulled it off. He pulled it off. See, the smell of my son. He believes he's talking about Esau. Is like the smell of a field which the Lord has blessed. Now may God give you the dew of heaven and of the fatness of the earth and abundance of gain and new wine. Verse 29. May peoples serve you and nations bow down to you. Be master over your brothers. And may your mother's son bow down to you. Cursed be those who curse you, and blessed be those who bless you. Now, the reason why I know that this is part of that covenant that was made to Abraham is because of the latter part of verse 29. Cursed be those who curse you, and blessed be those who bless you. If you turn back to chapter 12 of Genesis, you find those words as God called Abram. Genesis 12 and verse 3, he said, I will bless those who bless you, and the ones who curse you I will curse. And in you all the families of the earth will be blessed. Bless those who bless you, and curse those who curse you. So the blessing is being passed on to Jacob. It was prophesied it would happen in chapter 25, even before they were physically born. It was going to happen. So this whole deception is as if God used the situation to bring about His will. Now, someone might ask the question, how can God use sin to bring about His will? Did He not do that with the death of Christ? Was it not a sin to kill the Son of God? You go through the book of Acts, you see the preaching. You see Peter and the apostles tell the Jewish people, you murdered the Messiah. By lawless hands you took Him and killed Him. And they got to the point where they say, we don't want you to preach this anymore. You are trying to make us feel guilty here of this man's blood. Well, that was the point. They were guilty. They sinned in killing the Son of God. But that was God's scheme. That was God's plan the whole time, even before the foundation of the world, that Christ would be that sacrificial lamb. So He took their sinful actions in rejecting Christ and mistreating Him and killing Him to bring about salvation. God can turn any situation around. And He can take even that which is the activity of Satan and turn it around into something good. And that does not in any way say that those who were involved in the death of Christ were puppets. They had free moral agency. They chose to do what they did. But God knew they chose to do that, and He worked out that scheme of redemption so that rejection of His Son would bring about salvation. Did God not in the Old Testament use the Assyrian Empire, a wicked, ungodly empire, to bring judgment upon Israel? Did He not use the Babylonians, a wicked, ungodly empire, to bring judgment upon Judah? God can use any situation He so chooses. That's His sovereignty, His power. He's able to manipulate things according to His will. And so even though this is a deceitful situation with Rebekah and Jacob, it's still turning out to further God's scheme of things. It's turning out for God's will. But even remember earlier in chapter 25, Esau, we saw him as a person who was very impulsive, made impulsive decisions. He sold his birthright. He sold his birthright, no telling how many years before this incident. So he didn't put any value upon the blessing that Isaac was going to give to the firstborn anyway, willing to sell his birthright for just a little bit of food. So he didn't think straight back then, and now the blessing has been passed on. And some might think, well, what's the big deal about pronouncing a blessing? The pronouncing of a blessing during the age of the patriarch was like a contract or a will. It was something that even archaeologists have found evidence that when a blessing was passed on from a father to a son, it was legally binding. And it was something that it'd be equivalent to us writing out a will and assigning a will. Who's going to get what in the family. And that verbal blessing that was passed on was legally binding, and there was no reversing it. None whatsoever. And that'll explain the rest of things later on. Anything about that? Any questions or comments about that? I think it may have really originated with God, because you think about how Abram was called, a verbal pronouncement upon Abram, I will bless you and multiply you. So, of course, a verbal pronouncement from God is more powerful than any verbal pronouncement from man, but it's like that was passed on, that verbal pronouncement. The blessing was passed from Abraham to Isaac. And then God would speak that pronouncement to Isaac. We already saw how he already pronounced that to him himself. And then later on, Jacob. God is going to appear to Jacob and again reaffirm, I'm going to bless you, I'm going to multiply you like I did Abraham and Isaac. So the verbal pronouncement, so to speak, I think you could probably say originated with God, and it was just passed down from generation to generation. So when it is spoken, when it is made, it's irreversible, so to speak. Verse 30. Now it came about as soon as Isaac had finished blessing Jacob, Jacob had hardly gone out from the presence of Isaac, his father, that Esau, his brother, came in from his hunting. Now this is really going to turn into a confusing situation here. Esau went out hunting, got the animal, and verse 31, then he also made a savory food and brought it to his father, and he said to him, Father, or let my father arise and eat of his son's game, that you may bless me. Verse 32, Isaac, his father, said to him, Who are you? And he says, I am your son, your firstborn Esau. Now he just thought he had just blessed Esau. Now the real Esau is there. Verse 33, then Isaac trembled violently. That showed a great amount of sorrow. Literally, the Hebrew there means he trembled with a very great trembling. Probably because of various emotions. Anger at Jacob, because he liked Esau better than Jacob. And so the blessing wasn't going to go to Esau like he thought he had just pronounced it. And realizing that how important the blessing is to be transferred to the firstborn. That's just how you did things. The firstborn got the blessing. And so Isaac is very, very upset with the situation. Verse 33. And he said, Who was he then who hunted game and brought it to me, so that I eat of all of it before you came and blessed him? Yes, and he shall be blessed. And that shows the permanence of that blessing. He shall be blessed. It's been transferred to him. Verse 34, when Esau heard the words of his father, he cried out with exceedingly great and bitter cry, and said to his father, Bless me, even me also, my father. Now, it was before this, he didn't care anything about his birthright. He was willing to sell it. And now here's the consequences of his sin that he's facing. And it can't be reversed. And he's wanting to be blessed. He wants a blessing. Verse 35, and he said, Your brother came deceitfully and has taken away your blessing. Then he said, Is he not rightly called Jacob? For he has supplanted me these 2 times. Jacob's name means the one who supplants. And he says he's done it. This is the second time he's done it. Well, the first time he did it, he was taking advantage of Esau's impulsiveness and Esau's shallowness. You remember Jacob said, I have some food here. If you want some, I'll give it to you, but you sell me your birthright. And Esau foolishly did it. Now when he wants to inherit the blessing, because the birthright and the blessing go together, he's not going to receive it. And he can't reverse it. It cannot be undone. And he said, verse 36, had you not reserved a blessing for me? Now Esau's wanting a blessing. He knows that Jacob has done this to him, taken away the blessing, so to speak. Verse 37, but Isaac replied to Esau, behold, I have made him your master. Well, I'm sure that went over like a lead balloon. He didn't like him to begin with. And now he's going to be the master. Jacob is going to be Esau's master. Verse 37. And all his relatives I have given to him as servants, and all his relatives I have given to him as servants, and with grain and new wine I have sustained him. Now as for you then, what can I do, my son? Verse 38. Esau said to his father, do you have only one blessing, my father? Bless me, even me also, my father. So Esau lifted his voice and wept. Again, it shows there are certain decisions that are made, or certain consequences that cannot be undone. If you turn to the New Testament, Hebrews chapter 12, we looked at this before. Hebrews chapter 12 talks about that. Verse 15, Hebrews 12 and verse 15. See to it that no one comes short of the grace of God, that no root of bitterness spring up, causes trouble, and by it many are defiled, that there be no immoral or godless person, some translations say profane person, like Esau, who sold his own birthright for a single meal. Verse 17. For you know that even afterwards, when he desired to inherit the blessing, that's what we just read, he was rejected, for he found no place for repentance, though he sought for it with tears. It could not be undone. And through an impulsive, selfish decision, the consequences of which Esau would have to live with for the rest of his life. And so, even though a person can be forgiven, there are certain sins that carry with it consequences and that can't be undone. It won't be erased. And you can think of example after example of terrible decisions that people make in a fit of rage. They get angry at someone and they kill them. You can't undo that. You have to face the consequences. That person can be forgiven, but they got to face the consequences in this life of their crime. Right. 20 years. And that's going to be brought up a little bit later on in the chapter, that they're going to have to separate. They're going to have to get away from one another because Esau wants to kill him. And so it just reinforces the concept of think before you act. Think before you act. Don't despise that which is sacred. And that's exactly what Esau did. He despised the sacred, and it cost him. Cost him dearly. Verse 39. Back to Genesis 27 and verse 39. Then Isaac his father answered and said to him, behold, away from the fertility of the earth shall be your dwelling, and away from the dew of heaven from above. By your sword you shall live, and your brother you shall serve. But it shall come about when you become restless, that you will break his yoke from your neck. When you study throughout Israelite history and how the descendants of Isaac and Jacob become, of course, the nation of Israel, and the descendants of Esau become the Edomites, you see there's conflict between those two nations. Conflict. And I believe that is what is understood here, not only in the immediate life of Jacob and Esau, but in their descendants. There would be conflict as a result of this. Verse 41. So Esau bore a grudge against Jacob because of the blessing which his father had blessed him. And Esau said to himself, the days of mourning for my father are near. Then I will kill my brother Jacob. In other words, I'm going to wait till my father dies. Then I'm going to go kill him. Didn't want to do it during the time that Isaac was still alive. Didn't want to upset his father. But he says, after he passes, I'm going to go after him and I'm going to kill him. Verse 42, now when the words of her elder son Esau were reported to Rebekah, she sent and called her younger son Jacob and said to him, behold, your brother Esau is consoling himself concerning you by planning to kill you. Now therefore, my son, obey my voice and arise, flee to Haran to my brother Laban. That's going to be a 20-year exile, so to speak. Verse 44. Stay with him a few days. Well, that few days is going to turn into 20 years. Until your brother's fury subsides. Until your brother's anger, verse 45, against you subsides and he forgets what you did to him, then I will send and get you from there. Why should I be bereaved of you both in one day? So she is saying to him, go to my brother's house, Laban, go to Haran, get away from him, stay there for a while, and as was said, that while will turn into 20 years. Genesis 31, verse 38 and verse 41 indicate that that's going to be a 20-year exile. And so, sometimes, as we said before, certain actions have consequences that can never be reversed. When you look at the life of David and the mistakes that he made and the forgiveness he received, but the consequences he had to face, Nathan said, your sin is forgiven. Your sin of adultery is forgiven, but you've got to face the consequences for the rest of your life. The sword will never depart from your house. And that child that Bathsheba is carrying will die. So, consequences. We have to understand that. And some people almost get angry with God and upset with God when they become Christians or they receive the forgiveness of sins because God doesn't take away their consequences. And they think that God is not with them because they're still having to face the consequences of their sins, even though they're before God, they're justified. They are forgiven. But yet, because of foolish decisions that they've made in their life, they've got to face the consequences of it. And because they think God should take away those consequences, and He doesn't, then they think God's not with them. They've been forsaken by God. And that's just not the case. And that's why I try to talk to people who are struggling with difficulties in their life. And it's almost they think that the Bible is like a genie lamp, and you rub it, and the genie comes forth and takes away all your problems. And when it doesn't happen, they don't want to have anything else to do with it. It just doesn't happen that way. So, consequences are a result of sinful activity, and we have to deal with them, and God will be with us as we deal with them, but He's not going to take them away. Verse 46 will close out the chapter. Rebekah said to Isaac, I am tired of living because of the daughters of Heth. If Jacob takes a wife from the daughters of Heth, like these from the daughters of the land, what good will my life be to me? Rebekah is very concerned and expresses her concern to Isaac that Jacob is going to make the same mistake Esau made in marrying people of the land, or people who are not part of that family, so to speak. And so there is problems in the family there because these daughters of Heth are causing problems. And we talked about that earlier when we saw chapter 26, verse 34 and 35. Esau was 40 years old, and he married Judith and this other woman in Basemath of the Hittites. And I believe she's talking about the same people. And look at verse 35, and they brought grief to Isaac and Rebekah. Anytime you start marrying outside of those who share the same faith as you do, it's going to cause problems. It always has and it always will. We will take up our study not next week, that's singing, but the week after.